propaganda against the state. Her husband, Richard Radcliffe, called it a negotiating tactic, as Iran works to negotiate a revival of the international deal regarding its nuclear program. Here's Caroline Hawley.
Exactly a week after her 5-year sentence on charges of working against the regime had ended and her ankle tag had been removed, she was ordered to appear in court for this second trial on charges of propaganda against the regime. She was told there would be a judgment within 7 working days. That didn't happen. That was last month. So suddenly this morning her lawyer was summoned to the office of the judge who tried her, and that's where he was told that there was be this new sentence. She does have the right to appeal within 20 days, and the family plan to do exactly that.
World News from the BBC. Dozens of Kurdish politicians have gone on trial in Turkey. They're accused of complicity in deadly 2014 protests over perceptions that the army failed to intervene when, in plain view, Islamic State fighters overran the largely Kurdish town of Kobani in northern Syria. 27 people were killed in the protests. Lebanon has said it hopes Saudi Arabia will reconsider a ban it recently imposed on Lebanese fruit and vegetable imports. The Saudis said the shipments were being used for drug smuggling and accused Beirut of not taking sufficient action. The ban has been another blow to the Lebanese economy. Military sources in Nigeria say more than 30 soldiers have been killed in an Islamist attack on their convoy in the northeastern state of Borno. The insurgents are reported to have overrun an army base, burning military vehicles. Isaac Khalid is in Lagos.
Security sources say the armed militants driving in more than a dozen gun-mounted trucks attacked the military facility in the town of Minok on Sunday, opening fire and overpowering troops there. The Nigerian Air Force responded with airstrikes to support ground troops, clashing with the militants. The Nigerian Air Force says it's investigating the incident. The armed militants also attacked the town of Gaidam in Yobe State, planting booby traps. Fleeing residents told the BBC they killed a number of civilians, including a primary school teacher who they beheaded.
The winner of the Oscar for Best Director, Chloe Zhao, was born and raised in Beijing, but news of her win is being censored inside China. Posts celebrating Ms. Zhao's victory are being pulled from the Chinese social media sites, and the Chinese state-controlled media have not mentioned the awards. Beijing's disapproval appears to be linked to an interview she gave 8 years ago, in which she said growing up in China was like being in a place where there are lies everywhere. For the first time in 50 years, the Oscars were not shown in the Chinese territory of Hong Kong.
Hello and welcome to the News Hour from the BBC World Service. Coming to you live from London, I'm James Kamarasamy. Later on in the programme, as Chloe Zhao celebrates winning a Best Director Oscar for her film Nomadland, we'll be hearing from the teacher who first met her when she arrived in the UK from China, speaking very little English. But we begin in India, where the images of the sick and dying in overcrowded hospitals, and increasingly on the streets outside them, continue to proliferate as record-breaking numbers of daily COVID infections face overwhelming pressure on the country's health system. Many countries have experienced that pressure at different times during the pandemic, but India's size and its relative level of development mean that the disaster is unfolding on a much bigger scale, with possible global implications for the spread of the virus. The first batches of the promised emergency international aid oxygen cylinders from the United States have now started to arrive by air. But on the ground, many desperate Indians are having to fend for themselves, turning to the black market for the drugs and oxygen they need to stay alive, sometimes at hugely inflated prices. We'll get more on that in just a few moments. But first, the latest on the situation in the Indian capital from the BBC's Yogita Limaye.
The scene in front of me at the Panchkuya crematorium really gives you a sense of the scale of the tragedy that is unfolding in Delhi right now. Everywhere I look, there are funeral pyres burning. The air is full of smoke. My eyes are watering. The heat that's emanating from the pyres, it makes it almost unbearable to stand here. The person who manages this place told me that in normal times, at any given point, there are a maximum of 4 pyres burning. Right now, in front of me, there are 60. They're lighting pyres in between platforms because there's not enough space. And just outside, There's a row of bodies, relatives who've lost their loved ones waiting for their turn. Ambulances showing up every few minutes with dead bodies. People having to wait days to perform the last rites of their loved ones.
Each death is a story of personal loss and national shame. Charanjeev Malhotra has been helping to cremate the dead for decades. Now, he barely ever stops working. I've never seen such a terrifying situation. I can't believe that we're in the capital of India. People aren't getting oxygen and they're dying like animals, he says. We don't even have enough resources to cremate them properly. Outside, Shivangi Mehra is on the phone organizing oxygen for the hospital she works in, while she waits to cremate her grandfather, who died because of a shortage of it. She's angry at the government.
Nothing is being done. I don't know government is sleeping or what they are doing. Government is a literal failure. A person cannot live here in Delhi. A person cannot even die peacefully in Delhi.
Surjit Singh Gujral is cremating his 70-year-old father, Mahinder Singh Gujral.
Ground reality is a zero reality.
You can see what the ground reality is. There's nothing. No beds, no oxygen, no support from the government at all, he tells me. On the streets, ambulance sirens are a constant reminder of how COVID-19 is ripping through India. Social media is flooded with appeals for help, not just from ordinary people, but from doctors facing a daily struggle to arrange oxygen supplies. Dr. Tarkeem Haider is the Chief Medical Officer at Bed Hospital in North Delhi.
We have been spending sleepless nights since the last 1 week. I mean, we at times we feel like crying because we are not able to help the patient properly.
And so, families are being told to organize oxygen. At one medical shop, we found people lugging long, black, empty cylinders, waiting to buy their own supply for loved ones who urgently need it. The government says it's rushing in more oxygen, but for many, it's already too late.
Every crematorium we've been to, we've seen body after body being brought in. It's hard for anyone to keep count, but what workers have been telling me is that the real scale of deaths caused by COVID-19 in India is a lot higher than what official numbers reflect. And a lot of those who die right now have done so because they couldn't get oxygen.
There is a sense of abandonment in this country, of people being left to fight a vicious pandemic on their own.
Yogita Limay reporting from Delhi. The national spokesman for India's ruling BJP has told the BBC that the government is doing a lot to improve the supply of oxygen to hospitals and is setting up an additional 64,000 temporary beds for the treatment of COVID patients, some of them in railway carriages. Gopal Mangawal said the situation had been made worse by people seeking help when they didn't need it.
Definitely it's a crisis, but no need of panic as such, because the government has taken up the challenge. The government is working day and night, and we are receiving support from the international communities. Certain issues with regard to panic take the crisis more. Many of the people who may not be needing hospitalization due to panic, they are also rushing to get a bed in the hospital. That is putting further constraint on the hospital health infrastructure.
Dr. Arvind Boutra is a paediatrician in a Delhi hospital that's been converted into a specialist COVID hospital. He's currently recovering at home after getting the virus himself.
I received 2 doses of the vaccine, the Oxford AstraZeneca, and I was pretty confident things would be fine with me. But maybe about 10 days after the second dose, I started feeling ill. I had fever, sore throat, body, and I knew these were classic symptoms of COVID. I got myself tested, it came out positive. I rested at home for 5 days. I wasn't getting better. Since I'm diabetic, I had to get myself admitted. And I stayed in the hospital for 6 days. I was discharged about 3 days back. I'm home and I'm recovering well.
I'm glad to hear that. Presumably, if you hadn't had the 2 doses of the vaccine, you might have had an even more serious experience.
I would think so.
The experience that India is going through at the moment has been relayed in very powerful images. We've seen people in hospitals dying, outside hospitals sometimes because of a lack of beds, images of overcrowded crematoria with funeral pyres next to each other, and also very powerful words. One doctor I spoke to on the programme yesterday described what has happened as being like an atomic bomb going off. Another doctor we heard from on the World Service today described people dying like fish out of water. What words would you use to describe what's happening in India at the moment?
It's a horrendous experience for all medical professionals. If we cannot provide medical services on time, it's a terrible experience for all of us. Two immediate problems that this country, and especially the city of Delhi, is facing is the shortage of beds, which you rightly pointed out. And the second immediate problem that we are facing is a shortage of oxygen. These two immediate problems have to be tackled on a war footing.
Are they being treated as if this were a war?
I would think that the government is trying to put its best foot forward, but that is not sufficient. In fact, I think people should be held accountable for what has happened today, but I would postpone it for another day. I am afraid that the spin doctors or the government will, after 4 months, claim that great victory, that we did the second wave very well. And we should remind them of all the pictures and all the horrible things that people have gone through to make sure that these spin doctors do not put up a very rosy picture of any great work they have done. In fact, for the second wave, I think it was a failure of imagination. It was a failure of anticipating this problem and congratulating yourself too early that we had one victory over the coronavirus.
To use the war analogy, you're now getting reinforcements from your allies. What difference do you think the shipments of respiratory equipment, of vaccine components from the United States, what difference is that going to make, do you think?
I think it is going to make some difference. I wouldn't be surprised that it will take at least 10 to 15 days before all the good work that the world community is doing to help India actually reaches where it ought to reach. So I would like to thank the government of the United States of America, the UK government, and the European Union for helping the government of India in its time of crisis.
Just explain to us about the health system and how it works in India. It's under huge pressure, as we've discussed, but I think people outside the country might not know what kind of public and private level of healthcare there is in the country. Can you just explain?
India has a mixed system. So you have the public hospitals, which are government funded, and an equally strong private hospitals, which is pay for fee services. Typically, the well-to-do in this country would go to a private hospital, whereas the middle class and the poor people generally avail services from the government hospital. But now, even if you have the money, it doesn't buy you the bed.
And there are reports of large amounts of money now changing hands on the black market as people try to get hold of drugs and of oxygen.
Yes, that is true. I think every society has these unscrupulous antisocial elements. But I would also like to point out to you that there is a lot of good work being done in this country. There are people who are helping their neighbors, sick community, they're giving oxygen. So brothers are helping brothers. These horrible stories, yes, they are true. And what I feel is that all these people who are doing black marketing and voting, they ought to be reported to the law enforcement quickly, and we would expect the government to take urgent action against all these unscrupulous elements who are black marketing.
Earlier you said you suspect this is going to take another 10 days for the effects of the international help to make a difference. With that in mind, with the numbers that we are seeing on a daily basis now getting infected in India, do you have any situation in Delhi later on in the programme. We'll be hearing from a photographer who has been recording some of those powerful images of what's happening in the hospitals and also in recruitment. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. Coming up later on, 35 years after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, one woman's emotional return to the neighbouring town that she was forced to leave.
Смотри, Rebecca, look, this is the kind of furniture we had. Скажи, right? Nash is ours. Людмила recognized your apartment. Ой, Cecilia, ты угадала! No, I'm at home.
Headlines at this hour. Moscow's prosecutors ordered that the political officers of Alexei Navalny suspend their activities across Russia. He also filed a court motion to suspend the work of the opposition leader's anti-corruption foundation. We'll have more on that in just a few seconds' time. And the European Commission has launched legal action against AstraZeneca over alleged breach of contract related to the supply of its COVID vaccine. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is NewsHour, coming to you live from London with James Cameron. One of the main political strengths of the jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been his ability to get thousands of people out onto the streets of towns and cities across the country. Today, though, in a further tightening of the authorities' squeeze on him and his supporters, Moscow has suspended the activities of Navalny's nationwide political organisation. Our Moscow correspondent Sarah Rainsford joins us now. Sarah, just explain where this ruling has come from.
Well, this is part of a move by the prosecutor here in Moscow to basically close down all the big organisations linked to Alexei Navalny. So he's behind bars, and the idea now appears to be to go after anyone who supports him, or certainly those who work with him and for him. The regional offices were set up ahead of Alexei Navalny's attempt in 2018 to run for president. So they were his headquarters, essentially, of his campaign bid back then. But they've stayed in place and they've mobilised people for protests. They've also been part of Navalny's team's efforts to field candidates for various elections, from the lowest level to higher level elections. So that's that network of offices. Now, this move by the prosecutor is an attempt to brand both those offices and Mr. Navalny's anti-corruption foundation as extremists, which would really essentially ban them outright. It would mean very serious consequences for anyone linked to either of those organisations. For the moment, the move is to suspend them pending a court's decision on whether or not to declare them extremists.
This won't have come as a surprise to Mr. Navalny's supporters. Have they been reacting to this news?
Well, there's some reaction online, as you'd expect, from the sort of key figures within the movement, denouncing this as outrageous and calling it an attempt simply to shut down peaceful opposition here in Russia. But, you know, the interesting and sort of worrying thing is, I suppose, the reaction of those who are now scared to speak out. So Mr. Navalny's movement, I think, has been notable by the fact that it's full of young people with very passionate views who've been speaking out loudly and very critically of the authorities for some time now, and now calling them and asking for interviews, to meet them. They're all rather nervous. They're waiting to see exactly what happens with this court decision. I mean, I think nobody really doubts that their organisations are going to be designated as extremists, and everyone knows that that's extremely serious. Just in one sort of example of what that means, I've reported in the past on what happened to the Jehovah's Witnesses here in Russia after their organisation, their religion, was banned in 2017 as extremist, and since then there are dozens and dozens of them behind bars because they carried on practicing the religion, they carried on gathering, and therefore they were designated as extremists themselves. So essentially it means equating, legally speaking, followers of Navalny, like Jehovah's Witnesses, with ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
And he himself, as you said, is behind bars. He ended a 3-week hunger strike a few days ago. Any news on his health, or how he might be reacting to this?
Not yet, no. Although Mr. Navalny's lawyers do get to see him every day. Pretty much somebody from his team gets to see him because, of course, it's not just this sentence that he's serving now. He has a whole bunch of other criminal charges still pending against him. In fact, he'll be back in court, I think, later this week, in fact, on Thursday, because he's appealed
and beaten by soldiers from their country's special forces during an offensive against Colombian guerrillas operating inside Venezuela. Land and air operations were launched against a dissident faction of the FARC known as the 10th Front last month, causing at least 5,000 people to flee across the border into Colombia, where they're now living in temporary shelters. Matthew Charles sent this report from the Colombian border town of Arauquita.
Luckily, schools in Colombia remain closed because of the pandemic. It means the authorities here were able to house the thousands of refugees quickly, but the conditions in this school are cramped. There's plenty of outdoor space and biosecurity measures are in place, but the gym and the classrooms are full. Desks and chairs have been replaced by tents and mattresses. Social distancing is virtually impossible. But people here tell me the dangers posed by staying put in Venezuela outweigh the risk of infection. The school's one of 54 makeshift camps in this small town. The community has rallied round providing food and clothing. People here are grateful, they're relieved, happy they were able to escape, even if it meant leaving behind everything they owned.
Nosotros salimos de allá por el desplazamiento que
31-year-old Ana Maria Telesona fled from her home with her 2 small children.
y nos tuvimos que venir de inmediato.
It was so scary, we had to leave immediately. There was gunfire, explosions, bombs were flying from the sky. We left everything behind, our clothes, our belongings, everything. We got out as quickly as we could.
Violencia debilitan. In one of the classrooms, I meet 39-year-old farmer Luis Vasquez. He says he was having lunch when the army burst into his home and dragged him to a barn nearby. Like many of those I speak to here, he was accused of being an informant for the guerrillas.
They tied me up. They abused me mentally and physically. They punched and punched and punched in the head, the face, the ribs. But I'm no guerrilla.
Luis, his wife and 5 children now share a thin single mattress. They use a pile of textbooks as pillows. Along the Arauca River, there's basically a couple of 100 meters which divide Colombia and Venezuela. There's a visible military presence on both sides. It's no secret that since the days of former President Hugo Chavez, Venezuela has provided refuge for Colombian guerrilla groups like the FARC and the ELN. The government in Caracas allegedly has long-standing profit-sharing and protection deals with these leftist factions who are engaged in drug trafficking and extortion, among other criminal activities. So the question everyone's asking here is why do something about it now? Why target the 10th Front and not other dissident factions of the FARC or the ELN, which also are already here? Jorge Mantenilla is a conflict researcher whose work focuses on the border between Colombia and Venezuela.
The only reason for this military offensive has to do with the behavior of the 10th Front, its territorial and economic ambition, particularly its leadership, which has in turn the criminal arrangements and agreements that have occurred in the region for years.
The violence has provoked a war of words between the Colombian and Venezuelan governments. The Colombian Foreign Minister, Claudia Blum, accused the Venezuelan government of protecting its criminal interests over its own people. Bogotá has asked the UN Security Council to investigate.
Todo esto que estamos viviendo al sur
soldiers supporting the president Mohammed Abdullahi Farmajo. An Iranian court has sentenced the British Iranian charity worker Bracknell to a year in jail and a year-long travel ban on charges of propaganda against the state. The lawyer is planning to appeal. Doctors in India have given harrowing accounts of the situation there as the country battles a catastrophic wave of coronavirus infections. Medics at the capital say people are dying on the pavements outside hospitals as they wait for beds. Officials in Afghanistan's eastern Kunar province say a rocket attack on the governor's compound has injured at least 16 people. Many of them are children attending a competition to recite the Quran. Military sources in Nigeria say more than 30 soldiers have been killed in an Islamist attack on their convoy in the state of Borno. The insurgents are then reported to have overrun an army base, burning military vehicles. BBC has been told that the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson did make remarks suggesting that bodies could pile up high during discussion last autumn. Mr Johnson denied a newspaper report that said he'd rather have bodies piled up high in their thousands than order another lockdown. BBC News.
Well, next we'll hear about a history-making Oscar winner's nomadic childhood. First though, the forces loyal to the opposition in Somalia are occupying key parts of the capital Mogadishu following fighting in the city on Sunday against soldiers supporting President Mohammed Abdullahi Farmajo. Powerful politicians are opposed to the recent two-year extension of Mr Farmajo's mandate, which was due to expire in February. Well, our African editor Mary Harper joins us now. Mary, what's the latest situation in the city?
The latest information I have from journalists and security sources there is that soldiers and other individuals loyal to these powerful opposition figures have occupied some very important parts of the city, key junctions, an area only about half a kilometre from the presidential palace, and they're stationed there with their technical vehicles, which is the sort of nickname for cut-off vehicles, which are big machine guns mounted on the backs of them. And clan elders have been trying to negotiate some kind of peaceful way out of this, but at the moment it's a stalemate between these very powerful opposition groups, which now have armed support and forces loyal to President Mohammed Abdullahi Farmajo.
What has led to this becoming a confrontation as opposed to a political crisis?
Yes, there's been months and months of political argument about an election process that was meant to have happened already earlier this year, before the president's mandate expired in February, and those never really got resolved. And so there's been a lot of tension in Mogadishu, where you have the main clan there is opposed to the clan of President Farmajo, and basically this opposition presidential candidates who kind of gathered together in Mogadishu and formed an alliance, and they have now got armed support. The Somali military and police is already very divided along clan lines, so it's now split apart, with some supporting the president and others supporting the opposition.
And there's been international concern expressed about that decision by the president to postpone the elections and prolong his mandate. What justification has he given?
Well, he says that now he wants to have one person, one vote elections in Somalia, which is really quite an impossible thing to have, given that huge parts of the country are controlled by the Islamist group Al-Shabaab and other militias. So that's his excuse for trying to stay on for another 2 years. But the international community has said, come on, we've got other crises such as the Islamist insurgency that's been going on for about 14 years. We've got a locust invasion, we've got drought, we've got floods. Why on earth do you want to introduce yet another huge obstacle to restoring any kind of peace or normality to Somalia in the form of a political crisis which has now turned violent?
Mary, thanks very much. Our Africa editor Mary Harper there with the latest on that standoff in the capital of Somalia, Mogadishu. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is NewsHour, coming to you live from London with James Kamarasamy. The film industry's big night out came to an end a few hours ago third Best Actress statuette for Frances McDormand, while there were acting wins for the British duo of Sir Anthony Hopkins and Daniel. From Los Angeles, David Willis reports.
Welcome to the 93rd Oscars.
It's been quite a year, the actor-director Regina King told the audience, and she wasn't just referring to movie making.
I have to be honest, if things had gone differently this past week in Minneapolis, I might have traded in my heels for marching boots.
Beneath those heels, trains rumbled through LA's Union Station, chosen for its vaulted ceilings and wide open spaces as a replacement for the normal venue, the Dolby Theatre, 11 stops away. Producers feared holding the ceremony there would have turned it into a superstar superspreader.
Think of this as a movie set.
A movie set in which the tables were 6 feet apart and mingling was strictly discouraged. 2020 was a year in which cinemas were closed, blockbuster releases put on hold, and new movies viewed on small screens rather than big ones. Hence, this year's nominees consisted largely of low-budget dramas that most people haven't seen.
And the Oscar goes to...
Best Original Screenplay went to Britain's Emerald Fennell for her debut feature, Promising Young Woman. She made the film whilst 7 months pregnant and was awarded the first Oscar of the night.
Oh my God, he's so pretty and he's so cold.
Obscure though many of this year's movies may be, they nonetheless represented one of the most diverse Oscars in living memory. Daniel Kaluuya, raised on a council estate in North London, was named Best Supporting Actor for his role as the Black Panther leader Fred Hampton in Judas and the Black Messiah.
He showed me, he told me, European Union, Bobby Seale, Black Panther Party, they showed me how to love myself.
And the Oscar goes to Chloe Zhao.
Born in Beijing, Chloe Zhao became the first woman of colour to win Best Director. Her film Nomadland, about an itinerant woman in the American West, also won Best Picture, and she paid tribute to the real-life nomads who featured in the film.
This is for anyone who have the faith and the courage to hold on to the goodness in themselves and to hold on to the goodness in each other, no matter how difficult it is to do that.
Best Supporting Actress went to 73-year-old Ye Young-yoon for her role in Minari, a film about a South Korean family that moves to Arkansas. She's the first Asian actress to win an Oscar since 1957.
I'd like to thank to my 2 boys who made me go out and work. This is the result because mommy worked so hard.
Nearly 30 years after he was honoured for Silence of the Lambs, Sir Anthony Hopkins was named Best Actor for his role in The Father. The oldest actor at 83 to win an Academy Award, he wasn't present to receive it. The star of Nomadland, Frances McDormand, was named Best Actress, her 3rd win in that category, and she could have been speaking for cinema owners everywhere with this impassioned plea.
Please watch our movie on the largest screen possible, and one day, very, very soon, take everyone you know into a theater and watch every film that's represented here tonight.
Whether streaming services have now taken over remains to be seen, but Hollywood and the Oscars may never be the same again.
David Willis reporting. Although Beijing-born Chloe Zhao has been based in the United States for over a decade now, the 39-year-old, who, as David said, became the first woman of colour and only the second woman ever to win an Oscar for Best Director, initially moved from China to England when she was 14. She had a boarding school education at Brighton College, and Alison Withers was her house mistress at the time.
We are so incredibly proud of Chloe and absolutely delighted for her and all that she's achieved.
Tell us what she was like when you first came across her.
She was, right from the start, brave, always determined. What I really remember about her was that she was always wanting to understand why things were done in a certain way. So was always wanting to challenge and then work out for herself what was sort of behind some of the probably the strange customs to her. She was a kind girl, a very good friend to many.
Interesting you started with the word brave. Why do you say brave?
She arrived from China with very little English and really had to take on totally different culture. away from her family for the first time. You know, that was brave, and everything that she tried, she gave it her all, even if it wasn't totally her thing. We often had debates about whether hockey in the rain was the best thing for her, you know, she was, yeah, it was her determination, braveness I remember very much.
She's talked about her outsider status and that being the inspiration for her work, looking at characters who live on the periphery. Although she, as you say, she very much tried to embrace the new life in England and learn the language. Was there a sense that she was also always a bit of an outsider, and that gave her some of the creative inspiration that's come to fruition now?
No, we always obviously want to make sure that every child and every girl was integrated. I think the school has changed an enormous amount in 20 years, but probably at that time there weren't very many girls who are from outside the UK, so in that respect. But I think she was always very much her own person, and that's something that we always embrace at Brighton College, and I think that has come through, I think came through on her acceptance speech really, when she thanked her parents, and allowing her to be herself, true to herself, I think was evident from the start.
And that creativity, was it evident at Brighton College?
Yes, not necessarily in drama. She was very, very good at art. I think it's creative in that broad sense of being able to see things differently. I don't remember her directing any productions or actually being necessary in productions. It was creativity in its broader sense.
Which is probably good news to those who, you know, leaving school, leaving university and thinking they've missed the boat, that you don't necessarily have to plunge into student drama to end up as an Oscar winner.
Yeah, exactly. I think the qualities of being true to yourself, of kindness, being a good friend is what we're really trying to ensure that our pupils leave Brighton College with, and therefore have those skills then to, you know, the world is, as shown by Chloe, the world is your oyster.
Alison Withers, former housemistress to the Oscar-winning director Chloe Zhao. It's 35 years since the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in what was then Soviet Ukraine forced thousands of people to leave the nearby town of Pripyat for what they thought would be a short time. They were never allowed back. Lyudmila Fonsha's parents both worked at the power plant. She was just 4 years old when its reactor exploded. The BBC's Jana Bezpichuk was with Lyudmila when she recently returned to her childhood home for the first time since she left. Some of Lyudmila's words are in English, others are voiced by a producer.
Lyudmila is fulfilling her parents' wish. She and her cousin Petro are going home 35 years after the family were evacuated. This is the checkpoint for the Chernobyl exclusion zone.
For me, it's like very sensitive and something painful, and really painful.
Lyudmila's upset that they're selling souvenirs here.
I don't understand how people can sell and buy such souvenirs.
We can see the abandoned nuclear station and the tower out of the car window now. The Geiger counter in the car has started to go faster.
Так, ніхто не розумів, що воно буде так важко.
We thought that it was temporary and we could return to Pripyat. My parents were very happy in Pripyat. They just married, they just moved to this town. They said that life was really cool for them. They loved Pripyat.
The best time of their life was smashed up by the disaster in a matter of minutes.
Along with her older cousin Petro, who remembers the evacuation vividly, Lyudmila showed some of her family photos taken in the years which preceded the disaster.
На цьому фото, бачите, це красень.
In this photo, my parents have just been married. It was 1980. They married in February 1980 here, in the nearby town of Overwatch. My parents worked together. My father was the head of a small building company. Lyudmila is taking her first steps into the apartment block. The family left in such a hurry all those years ago. The authorities told them they were only leaving for 3 days, but they were never allowed back. Lyudmila's mother took one extra dress and just a few other belongings. The 4th floor. Смотри, мебель как...
Look, this is the kind of furniture we had.
Скажи,
Right?
наша.
It's ours. Людмила recognized her apartment.
89-я угадала. Дома.
I'm at home.
I remember that here I think we had armchair and small table, and near the table I had my own doll armchair, and we unfortunately forgot it here.
Ludmila's father, Ivan, was one of the workers who constructed the sarcophagus, the protective cover for the exploded reactor.
Тато ніколи не говорив, що це
He never mentioned it was a dangerous job. We understood only several years later that it really was. If we had known that it was dangerous, my father would not have gone there as a liquidator. He went there every 2 weeks during 4 or 5 years after the disaster. The family were moved to Kiev. Both Ludmila's parents were given Chernobyl disabled person status. This gave them slightly higher pensions. Her mother, Maria, continued her work as a cashier at a company which built up the nuclear power plant the first few months after the explosion. She became ill with cancer and died 9 years after the act. Her father survived though and died 24 years after the accident. This is Ludmila's first attempt to come to terms with the Chernobyl memory. I realized that my understanding comes mostly from what parents told me. Today it's my first own experience of getting through the memories of Pripyat by myself. After this emotional meeting with her childhood, Ludmila says she doesn't feel this here anymore.
Shannon is Ketchup reporting, and if you go to our website you can watch a video of Ludmila's trip back to her childhood home inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Just look at bbc.com/. So you're listening to NewsHour from the BBC World Service.
Now let's look at what else you can hear from the BBC World Service. In 10 minutes, today's guest on Hard Talk is the former UK ambassador to the US, Sir Peter Westmacott.
Engaging with China, though, is a huge, complex challenge. Might be less difficult than engaging with Russia, which I think is kind of more destructive and more determined to be talked about and be the centre of attention.
And at bbcworldservice.com, listen to our series about saving our planet.
I'm not sure that the carbon footprinting label as it stands will generate a sea change in customer behaviour in terms of purchasing products with carbon labels.
And Deeply Human aims to understand the menopause. For some, menopause isn't really that big a deal. For others, it meaningfully alters what it feels like to be alive in their own bodies. Hear more at bbcworldservice.com. Now it's back to NewsHour.
A reminder of our top stories this hour. Doctors in India have been giving harrowing accounts of the situation there as the country battles a catastrophic wave of coronavirus infections. On NewsHour, Dr. Arvind Bountra in Delhi gave us his assessment.
It's a horrendous experience for all medical professionals. Two immediate problems that this country, and especially the city of Delhi, is facing is the shortage of beds, and the second immediate problem that we are facing is the shortage of oxygen. These two immediate problems have to be tackled on a war footing.
Other headlines at this hour. The European Commission has launched legal action against AstraZeneca over alleged breach of contract relating to the supply of its COVID vaccine. And militias loyal to the Somali opposition are occupying key parts of Mogadishu after an eruption of fighting over the weekend. Civilians have been fleeing affected areas. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is NewsHour, coming to you live from London with James Kumarasamy. Let's return now to our main story. India's struggle to cope with a huge wave of coronavirus infections. Dr. Ajit Singh Bhatti works on the COVID ward of Delhi's Manipal Hospital. He told the BBC that people were dying on the streets outside hospitals as they wait to be admitted.
People were gasping for oxygen, they are asking for hospital beds, their saturations is falling, but unfortunately we don't have that type of infrastructure available to provide beds, specifically oxygen beds to them. The situation is like, have you seen the fish out of water? The situation is same as the people who are dying, struggling for oxygen, they are not getting oxygen and they are dying on roads, so it is becoming very difficult day by day.
Well, at the beginning of the programme I mentioned the poignant images which have been coming out of India in recent days. One of the people who has been capturing them is the chief photographer for the Reuters news agency in Delhi, Danish Siddiqui.
I couldn't believe that I was recording this COVID situation in Delhi because it's the national capital with the best medical infrastructure in the country. And when you see people gasping for oxygen outside hospitals or people sitting in rickshaws or dead bodies being taken from the rickshaws outside the hospital, it just makes you tremble that is it happening in the center of the capital of one of the biggest countries in the world. Also, I've been covering this pandemic for the last 1 year, and the first wave last year was, I think, extremely mild. I don't want to underestimate the numbers, but extremely mild as compared to what is happening in the last 3 weeks since I've been out and about shooting almost every day and going to the hospitals, mortuaries, the crematoriums, or the graveyards. So there is a lot of panic, which is because there is lack of oxygen. People are standing in lines with their oxygen cylinders to get it refilled. People are not finding beds. I get dozens of messages every day from people who don't even know, can you please arrange a bed, can you please arrange an oxygen cylinder, or my relative needs this. But it's so disheartening that I can't even get them a bed, or most of the requests I cannot comply because it's just the state of affairs right now, quite sad.
How are you choosing what images to record?
We wanted to show that the second wave is very, very dangerous as compared to the last one, and one of the first images which I sent out was from one of the crematoriums where I took the aerial perspective to show the number of deaths which are happening in the capital. And from there on, I have been in the hospitals where I have showcased how, because of lack of infrastructure, patients are sharing beds. Sometimes it's 2 and sometimes 3. I'm not able to publish a lot of pictures, I would say, which are not giving dignity to the victims who are dead.
That aerial picture you refer to showing the funeral pyres, just the numbers of them, why does that have such a power? It's not showing, humans experiencing it is showing death and what happens after death. Why do you think that has had such power?
This picture shows so many fires in one space, and it sends out a message that what was happening last year, what was happening before, it is gone to a totally different level, and there are people actually dying in a lot more numbers than what the government data says.
And what about the way that people are trying to help? What have you been able to show?
The thing is it's amazing how the civil society has realized that they can't leave everything on the government, and people are helping each other. A couple of nights back, I spent some time outside a Sikh temple called Gurudwara Sikh, and there were people who were buying oxygen on their own, getting oxygen cylinders refilled, and just giving oxygen to as many people as they can who are coming to this temple outside the roads. So it's just like civil society has really stepped up its game.
And how are people reacting to you taking photographs of them in these desperate situations?
People actually want me to take photographs of them. I can give you an example. When I was in this overcrowded emergency ward in one of the government hospitals, people actually were telling me while I was dressed up in all my PPE gear to please take the pictures and show the world what's happening inside the hospitals. So people are very willing towards journalists because they want the world to know that what's actually happening in the national capital of this country. Most of the people really want us to cover this unfolding disaster.
Are the authorities as open to you taking pictures?
that's tricky because the government authorities, I think, after the pictures of the crematorium and other places where I showcase the state of the hospital went out and were widely shared and published, I think a lot of access has been stopped, at least in the government places or the media. People want us to showcase what's happening, but not the authorities.
Really, even if it helps perhaps to get international attention and the kind of international help which is starting to arrive.
Yes, but the backlash is also happening that the government, people thought like the COVID is over, as the government was telling them through various things like conducting elections and massive rallies. But then now people realize actually COVID has hit us hard, much more harder than the last time.
And you said that people are just getting in touch with you, asking for help, asking for beds, asking for things that are beyond presumably what you were able to deliver. What kind of impact do those messages have on you?
You feel frustrated sometimes with it, that like most of them, you know these people, and a lot of them have been your childhood friends or you have studied with them, and they expect that because I am going to these high-risk zones and as a journalist I've been going to all these places inside the hospital, maybe I have contacts and I can get them a bed or like oxygen cylinder or something, but it's not happening, and it can't happen because there are not enough beds in any hospital, like at least in the big government hospitals and private hospitals.
The personal and the professional overlapping there for Danish Siddiqui, chief photographer for the Reuters news agency in Delhi. He was speaking to me from in India, from the capital, Delhi. Just to let you know, for the 5th day in a row, the number of infections, new infections in India has broken records. 352,991 recorded, 2,812 new deaths, also the highest figure in the country. Earlier in the program we were talking about the booming black market for oxygen and COVID drugs as a result of what's happening in the country. There's a lot more detail on our website. For example, an oxygen cylinder that normally costs $80 now costs up to $1,300 on the black market. Look for the article by our colleague Vikas Pandey. That brings us to an end of this edition of News Hour. From me, James Kumarasamy, and the rest of the team, thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service, where Dan Stevens with Martha Wash continues.
Hi, people like to call me the Queen of Clubland. I'm celebrating the pioneering women of New York's dance music scene. In part 2, how female vocalists had to fight to get credit for their work in the 80s and 90s.
Dan Stevens at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries. And in an hour, we join Nuala McGovern for OS.
Listen in for a conversation we had with 3 people in Australia, the US and South Korea who suffer from a debilitating invisible condition, severe health anxiety. As you can imagine, they're suffering even more during this health crisis of the coronavirus pandemic. You'll hear their stories.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.